Be sure to watch my TED Talk on londonreal.tv. This is Silicon Reel, the weekly talk show dedicated to the people of the London technology startup scene. I'm Brian Rose. I also host London Reel. It's same studio. We get a couple cool guys in the room, try to figure some things out. We just had astrophysicist Neil deGrasse Tyson from the show Cosmos. He was cool. He put me in a headlock. I think he would have beat me in a fight. He's a pretty tough guy. We also have Edward Snowden's attorney on this week, Jessalyn Radek. She's talking about the NSA. And then we've also got Nelson Mandela's prison guard coming up on Sunday.
Cool.
Yeah, he was actually his prison warden in Robben Island. And then, of course, in Nelson Mandela form, he hired him later as part of his presidential administration. So I know, crazy intense stuff. So check that out at londonreal.tv. But we're here today to talk about tech. My co-host is none other than Mr. Bryce Keane.
Hello.
Co-founder or founder of Albion Drive, former Beard or current Beard.
Co-founder of the Beards, advisor now, I guess.
Bryce, where you been? I have missed you, I must say.
I've been, where have I been? I've been in Australia. I went home for 3.5 weeks. I think have I been back since then? Checked out the tech scene. I think I came in once after that.
Yeah.
And then I have been working on, working on a lot of stuff with the Beards. So we're doing the big international expansion.
Okay, so you're still involved with the Beards?
Yeah, I'm now a board advisor,
Okay.
and I still do a lot of stuff behind the scenes. But Albion Drive is growing. We're hiring. We're at sort of 8 people, soon to be sort of 11. So I've sort of taken a step back from the day-to-day, but I do a lot of the strategy, and we're now putting some of my very talented PR team to help the Beards this year. And it's about kind of helping accelerate them, but not being a bottleneck either, because I was juggling the two, and it was all getting a bit sort of difficult for everyone. So sort of came back from Oz, and then I was like, okay, we need to kind of figure out what's the most efficient way to help these guys grow and scale this year. And I think the answer to that was to kind of step back, focus on the day job, but pour resource from Albion, and actually not just Drive, but actually the mothership Albion.
The whole thing.
They are keen to kind of help them this year, which is pretty exciting because they're the guys behind Skype and Betfair and Wonga.
Yeah, really like Albion. We had Jason in here, and then I went over and did a talk at Albion. Really good energy in that company.
Yeah,
Seems
really
like
good.
It's a lot of fun over there.
And one of the last independent creative shops now. They're all the acquisitions. They're buying them up there front and center, you see. And Albion's one of the few. That's why I joined actually, because I'd done 12 years of startup work before I got there, and B, because they're one of the last independent ones where you can actually go and make stuff, and be what you want to be.
And they support startups as well themselves. I think Jason does that, doesn't he?
Yeah,
He does.
It's a big
He's
startup mentality.
Yeah, he's investor in a couple of companies. He's on the board of a few companies. He's got co-working space in the office. He hired a whole floor in the T building, which can't be cheap, just to put a co-working space in for startups, friends and family. So
Good, exciting stuff, man. Well, thanks for coming back. Please come back more often.
Yes.
I get a little sick and tired of Colin Powell. Too much Canadian in the house. So just kidding. Just kidding. Before we get to our guest, I just wanted to say thanks to the FinTech Innovation Lab, one of our sponsors. Their 7 companies just gave a pitch, or they're giving it at the end of this week, or if you're listening to us after the delay, they've given a pitch at 7 different companies. One of them was PixelPin that we had on.
Oh, amazing.
Yeah, really exciting company that turns your basically your passwords into actually like graphic remembrances of what you have, and I think it's the future of passwords. I don't know how many of us have passwords copied down in text files somewhere. So it's exciting stuff. If you want to check them out, go to fintechinnovationlab.co.uk, and thanks to them. We also want to thank TaskRabbit. I think you're using those guys for your 3 Beards.
we are indeed. Yeah.
They
extra hands.
Yeah, they're fantastic. They're an online marketplace, allows you to outsource small jobs to people in your community. They do a lot of the Silicon Reel work behind the scenes, so it's not just cleaners and plumbers. They can also do really highly skilled tasks.
Yeah.
So
They do
check
admin
them
and all
out.
sorts.
We had Lauren on, their head of community. She was awesome on here about 6 weeks ago. Definitely check that show out, and you can use code REAL25, get £25, and try them out yourself. So
TaskRabbit have a London office now as well,
They
right?
do.
Yeah.
They set up shop here. Lauren actually came out to do it by herself.
before Christmas, I think. So
Yeah.
they're everywhere. So definitely check them out. They're a good resource for short-term help. Anyways, on with the show. Our guest today is a man I've heard about for many, many months from you, Bryce, who's introduced us to a few of our guests over the years, over the 6 months or so on Silicon Reel. It's Mr. Monty Munford.
Hello.
Who is the founder, is it Mob76?
Mob76, yeah.
Which is a content strategy and exit consultant for tech companies.
Yep,
You also write quite a lot for places like The Economist, Mashable, The Telegraph, Wired UK, BBC Future.
Yeah.
He's the Michael Caine of tech journalism.
There you go.
That's how I describe him.
Now I know what you mean. He's dressed in black like Johnny Cash.
Smooth.
You've also acted as a Bollywood villain in 2 major motion pictures.
That's true.
I was expecting a denial somewhere. Monty, welcome to Silicon Reel.
Hey, man, thank you for inviting me. I appreciate it.
Thanks so much for being here. You know, we kind of have a format that we've gotten into on Silicon Reel, and it's kind of every week we invite someone in and they tell us about their business, the business model. They give us their thoughts on the city of London as a tech competitor, and then we find out about them as the person. But it's nice to shake it up a bit and not be here just to talk about one business model.
Yeah.
And so that's why I'm glad you're here today, because you can maybe give us kind of your thoughts and an overview. You've been in this business for a while. We've had other people on like Benjamin Southworth in the beginning, or I guess maybe Simon Devonshire away, where we're a bit more big picture guys.
Yeah.
But it's nice to have someone who's not in the thick of the startup.
Yeah, and I think with Monty, the reason I want to get Monty on is because he's also one of the best traveled tech journalists that ever was. And that's saying something. They do travel a bit, but Monty goes to places most people don't actually even consider as could be some emerging tech, and he goes and writes about those companies, and I think that's the most interesting, really interesting part as well, which is...
Yeah, well, let's get started. You just said you came back from Nairobi
Yeah,
recently?
I was in Nairobi for 4 or 5 days this week.
And you lived in Goa for a while. Tell us a bit more about you. How long have you been involved in this industry? And then if you could talk a bit about your emerging markets experience, because that's a bit rare.
So I didn't go to university, and I was actually weirdly coming up to this office today. I used to deliver parcels to this office, or this space, when I was a dispatch rider in London for 12 years.
So, and how long ago was that you were delivering?
So I gave it up probably 20 years ago, I suppose.
And you came to this building 20
I came
years
to
ago.
this. I remember there was a geezer called Nick. He was a bit of a dude, and he had a good-looking girl on the back of his bike, and then he ended up being a chauffeur for Lincoln Continentals. I remember exactly coming to this building, and we had a race from Soho, and then coming down City Road, Clerkenwell Road. I realised there was a shortcut, and I arrived here earlier than he arrived with a girl on the back of the bike, and he was extraordinarily pissed off about that.
From Soho? That's
We had a race, actually.
That's quite a feat.
Yeah, well, it's a difficult job, a few broken bones, broken knee, nearly lost my left foot in an accident. Hit a car, my foot got stuck in the wheel arch, 10 days in hospital, broke all my metatarsals, broken arm, broken nose, and some broken ribs.
That's a tough job. Did you used to hang out at the foundry afterwards, or was that big back then?
No, I didn't. This part of the world didn't exist as it does now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Who were you delivering packages to?
Pretty much people that lived west, I suppose.
Okay.
You know what I mean? So it would be work from St Martin's Lane and film, basically.
Okay.
And most of the jobs would be going west, and you'd try and get as many jobs as you could going west. So you got paid fivefold. I did it for a load of companies. It was a very good scene. It was almost like being a waiter in Hollywood. Everyone was going to be a writer or a musician, or were, and it's not like that anymore.
Okay, and then how did you get involved with tech and this whole scene?
I decided to retrain as a journalist when I stopped the bikes, moved down to Brighton, went to the London College of Printing just down the road, didn't go to uni, did a 13-week course in editorial journalism, and it was an extraordinary 3 months, you know what I mean? So I went to The Independent. I wanted to write for The Face. There was a great journalist called Gavin Hills that came out of the rave scene, and he wrote the type of stuff that I kind of almost write about now. And he'd do stuff for The Face, like in Bosnia, going clubbing with soldiers with pit bulls. And he wrote a brilliant piece about Namibia. And I remember the opening paragraph was, my cameraman's in the toilet, he's just banged his head against the sink, he's bleeding, I've got malaria, welcome to Namibia. And then, I don't know, I was on a train back from London to Brighton about 6 months later, bored, going through the paper, and then there was an obituary for Gavin Hills. And he died in an accident, drowned. I can't remember what it was. So I don't know, it kind of gave me the inspiration to not be like him. But I mean, he came out of the rave scene as well. He wrote some great pieces in a book called Disco Biscuits, when ecstasy had changed football hooligans into being lovers and lovey type of people. And I suppose that was it. So I wanted to write for The Face, and part of the deal with the 3-week course, you had to get 2 weeks secondment somewhere. So I went to the Independent Sports Desk because I like football. And then I wanted to try and get working at The Face, and then someone came down. We had to do a piece on a guy called Tony Loynes, who was a publisher of a weekly IT magazine called Computing, and said, this is where it's all happening, this is the new rock and roll. And I figured that I'd been travelling for 20 years, either on the bike or abroad, and this was my chance to catch up. So I did a year at Computing as a sub-editor, subbing the most unreadable copy from people that knew a lot about computers but nothing about writing. So I figured if I did that for a year, then I'd be able to, move on. And then after that, it all went very quickly, and I caught up quite quickly, I think. You know, as a communications director on the first series of Big Brother, and the company that I worked for, Victoria Real, that was, I think, subsumed by Endemol. I think the people that they owned the format for Big Brother, and that was an amazing time. It was almost when the internet had taken over from TV. You know, there was a big scene, Nasty Nick. I don't know if you remember it.
It was the UK version, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I was Dutch first, I think. You know, and then suddenly, you know, I learned a lot about the media at that time, and then it just went up and down over the last 10 years. Worked for a mobile games publisher via a company in Brighton called Babel Media, which was a games company. Did a deal with Vodafone for all the games that were released, mobile games. You know, mobile games as they are now are very different to what they were then. So did a deal with Vodafone, so every game was going to be tested or certified via our processes. And I realised at that time that mobile games was going to be the next thing. So I went to work for a publisher called Player X in Soho. We raised quite a lot of money and we spent it by travelling and having quite a good time, lots of parties. And I suppose our claim to fame was that we failed Angry Birds. We were offered it before the iPhone channel. And because Rovio's games were all pretty rubbish, to be honest, and they put 50 games through our... I mean, at that time, if you were a developer, you offered it to a publisher, and the publisher kind of had the rights. And we failed Angry Birds, which is no...
Which is the Swedish company.
Finnish.
Finnish, okay.
No problem. I don't mind the fact that we could have made $1 billion.
Okay.
But your fails are your wins, right?
I mean, who would have known if you would have pitched me that in a bar in a minute?
No, well, their games were before, and I think that, you know, they would admit it as well. They weren't very good, you know, and they got very lucky. And then as soon as, not lucky, that would be mean to say that, but when I came back from India 3 years ago, I went to Helsinki to see Rovio, and I knew what was coming, you know, because we were called the Rovio Killer. That was the name of our company. So when I walked in there, you know, Peter Vesterbackers, the marketing guy, is quite a very big genius, actually. And I went in and he goes, "Oh, Monty, you used to work for Player X, so here you've gone to Bollywood and done the Hollywood stuff. But just a minute, everybody, should we tell Monty, we are fucking billionaires!" You know, so took it in reasonably good grace, you know.
And when did you start writing for the tech scene? When you finished with that?
Well, because I went in and out from being a writer, and then I kind of swapped sides really with the Victoria Real area. I went to work for an incubator, and then I went as a website editor of the local paper in Brighton, which was weird, and it lasted 3 months. We hated everyone. We all hated each other. I kind of had a feeling that digital was the future, but I don't think digital was mentioned in those times. It was all internet.
This is what, 05, 06?
No, I mean 99, 2000, I think.
Okay.
Something like that. And then I was always a writer, and I wanted to be a writer. I wasn't a very good one, but you know, because I did everything quite late. So when I went to India in 2008 to get away from, well, not get away from Player X, but it was a pretty heavy party lifestyle, and I was a bit done with it as well. So we had a 5-year-old son, so we thought, you know, my wife is a good traveller as well, did a lot of stuff for the Tibetan Information Network, and spent 17 days hitchhiking in China. You know, it's a cool chick now, you know, nearly 13 years married. I said, well, why don't we go to India? And she said, well, you know, you're running away. But I could feel there was a storm coming, especially with the recession and the fact that I was quite vulnerable. I was kind of quite highly paid. And I'd have probably been the first to go, I think. So we went there, and then, so I used to write a newsletter, you know, parallel to my job, called Monty's Gaming and Wireless Outlook, which was pretty much a compendium of 30 stories. You know, it was quite a strange time, but it was basically, it's Friday, it's 20 to 12, you haven't read the newspapers, here are 10 stories about mobile games in North America, in Europe, and in Asia. So it was a kind of resource for people to find those links, and then there would be 400 or 500 words of, you know, reasonably satirical editorial about the industry, you know. And there was, you know, Nokia sponsored it quite well. I put some money in my pocket, so that was something that I kind of kept going when I went to India. Then that became Monty's Indian Outlook, and it was my stories of living in India and, you know, getting away from the recession. And then the Telegraph got in touch with me and said, you know, would you like to string for us and write stories about India? So that was good, you know, it was a broadsheet. So I did that for about a year. was very well acquainted with the Telegraph trolls, who are the worst people on the planet. And
the trolls, what was that?
Jesus, just the people
internet trolls.
The internet trolls.
So for the Telegraph, the comment section of the Daily
Telegraph. They're Neanderthal, I'm
Oh,
telling you.
okay, it's brutal.
Hyper. I mean, it's known as a conservative paper. Right? It's right-leaning.
I wrote a piece about corporal punishment in India, right? And the story was that parents of a private school, public school, whatever you call it, were invited to see their children do. I'm seeing my son in the school play tomorrow night, Peter Pan, but their area was, watch your children walk across hot coals. So they took all these kids from the age of 5 up until 11, and all these poor kids, burnt their feet, were terribly distressed. But not one single parent, complains because, make them hard and all that stuff. So I wrote a piece saying, corporate punishments on the statute books, why don't they start, prosecuting people for hurting children? Reasonably good piece, reasonably informative, The amount of abuse I got from Telegraph readers, serves them right, don't spare the rod, and it's, what are you talking about,
But do you read these things? I would just think as
it's
a writer...
It's a good point, Mark, because at first...
Or do you need to as a writer?
No, I don't know. I think you get used to it, right? And it's the way. Anonymous abuse is like, I'm a very small player in these type of areas. And when you do it for the first time, the first few pieces, and you see these comments, the first thing is, right, I'll get the boys round, I'll come round, you do feel really angry about it. And after a while, it's like, well, if you're making comments on where's your life? What are you doing? Who cares?
It's an interesting phenomenon because we get lots of hate on London Real, which is weird because we give free content every week. You wouldn't think anyone would have a problem with that. Yeah. But it's weird because you kind of have to listen to about 5% of it to get a little feedback. But if you listen to the other 95, it's never going to be helpful. To
well, no, sometimes I'm not saying that everyone that reads my stuff at the Telegraph is evil. A lot of the times it can become a great focus group for the next piece you're going to write because people know more than you and point out where you went wrong. I mean, we're not all, perfect. So it can be, probably more than 5%, but, it could be, I didn't know that, or I should talk to that company, or I should find out more, or I will become better on the basis of that. So it's not all negative, but it's generally, mean.
Right, and that's part of the business. Now, what do you write about these days? Are you still a mobile guy? Are you still
No, I was the mobile guy, I think, before I went to India. And I was doing stuff in India as well. The company was sold when I was away. So I got a conservatory out of it, not a mortgage, if you know what I mean. It was all right. And so then I started to consult. I consulted. I knew the thing about Indian mobile companies is quite similar. At the time, there was 4 or 5 big ones. So I knew the people within those organisations. So if it was Reliance or if it was, or now Bharti Airtel, in India you need to talk to the man, you know what I mean? And you find out, you have to go through a lot of, steps to get to the decision maker. But if you can pinpoint the decision maker, which I kind of had done anyway for BizDev with Player X, because we had a Indian development studio in Pune, in between Mumbai and Goa. So there was, a lot of interest. India, So I was consulting for Nokia and I was consulting for Paramount in Los Angeles. Excuse me. They were releasing Iron Man 2. They wanted to meet a few people. So it was really interesting. And then, again, when the network was upped, because I acted in a couple of movies, a mate of mine had a hotel, James, and said, do you want to be a dead soldier in the movie? And I said, absolutely, I do, because when I was travelling 20 years ago, I went to some ruins, and my best mate and a girl, they were in a movie, so it kind of rankled to me. I mean, it went a bit mental, So
you started off as a dead body, and then you moved on from
there. Then I became Captain Farrell, and then I became Major Johnson.
Are you speaking English in these movies?
Yeah, well, I didn't speak many words. I spoke Punjabi. That was interesting.
Okay, and this is while you're in Goa, you're shooting these, or you're traveling around India to shoot them?
Well, with my family, we went up to Kashmir, and not Kashmir, but we went up to Manali, and we travelled around the north of India. My wife and I have a massive love affair with that, and we thought it was a good thing with a 5-year-old son who was there for the first year. We were only going to stay a year, and then he was in a suite, international school for the first year. Jump on a motorbike, go past the buffaloes, have a bet on the next animal we would see. It was beautiful. Get up in the morning, see the kingfishers. Amazing. And then the second year, he was at a kind of. He was the only. Well, there were 2 white kids in 27 school, which is quite difficult when he went there for the first day. Indian schools allowed.
So, and then when did you come back to London? 2010, 2011?
Yeah, so we came back 2010, and we were going to stay another year. So we were going to take our son up to the Eton of India, called Woodstock, and then we were going to come back after 3 years. And then my sister is quite a senior academic in education, and Rum, who's Jack's godmother's a teacher in Bromley. They both said, you know, he's been to a school in Brighton, he's been to a school in India, he's been to another school in India, he's been to another school in India, and then he'll be 8 years old, and that'll be his 5th year. So that was we were told off, basically.
Came back early.
Yeah.
And when you come back to the scene, does it look completely different than when you left it? Were you shocked? Was this whole area around here
I
new?
think the thing I'd missed, right, was that because India's connectivity is weird and different, you know, so you have a kind of Nokia phone and, you know, it doesn't work, and you're trying to find stuff. It doesn't work. And when I came back, everything worked, and it took me a long time to realise it actually worked, and I could have 3G and all that stuff. So that was one thing. But I think the thing that I kind of swapped when I was in India, because I went from mobile to social, you know, so the kind of narcissism of Facebook was quite good for me. Like, I'm in a Bollywood movie, tell all my mates back home, you know, and then, you know, I was put up stuff on, you know, Twitter. You know, I've been wearing this stick-on fucking moustache for 8 hours now. Hashtag go to Bollywood or whatever. So I think that was the change. So when we came back, I mean, I used to work in the media, and, you know, so I kind of made it quite clear that I was back. Everyone, you know, want to spend more time with a job as opposed to my family. And I'd almost rendered myself kind of unemployable, because I'd basically showed off about, you know, I left the recession and everything like that. So it was a really tricky, you know, 6 or 9 months, you know, to get back. I go to London for 5 days a week. And then I swapped over from the Telegraph Indian work to the Shane Richmond, great man, at the Telegraph, and said, you know, can I write about tech as well, you know. So he's had a couple of ideas. So that relationship has gone on, yeah, for 3 years, you know. I write for them every week.
And you write for the Telegraph and then for Wired as well?
Yeah, Wired, yeah, I think, because Mike Butcher at TechCrunch is a good mate of mine. Yeah. He let me write a few things for TechCrunch, and I'd met his editorial director, Sarah Lacey, in India, went to the first Indian Premier League cricket game, and she was a guest of some mates of mine from India games. So we had, you know, had a night out drinking and talking and telling me about what London was like, and Mike was a mate of hers. She's a very good journalist, and she'd written a lot of stuff in Africa, you know, as a woman on her own. Again, kind of Gavin Hills-esque as a bit of an inspiration, you know, how you can do stuff. And Mike was, you know, it's the new rock and roll, man, you know, like, get into it. So Mike's been a bit of an inspiration, I'd have to say.
Yeah, working on getting him on as well.
Yeah, Mike would be great. I mean,
Sarah Lacey we're referring to, who then went
so
on to
she now
found
runs Pando Daily,
right, which is a huge
Valley.
Silicon Valley tech site.
So what are you writing about these days?
Well, at first it was like being back at computing, you know, like 12 years earlier, and I had to take every press trip, and I had to try and find the stories, and, you know, and I was trying to do, you know, paid work, you know, proper money as well. So yeah, so it took a bit of time, and I was used to $400 a month rent, you know, living in a almost a Morocco meets LA house by the marshlands, you know, with a palm tree growing in the middle of the place, and then suddenly living in Lewis in a very small place. And yeah, it just rolled on, I suppose, you know, and then, you know, kind of biz dev guy, you know, so it's difficult to, you know, find who's the person that commissions at Mashable, who's the person that commissions at this, that and the other. And it's just rolled on, I suppose.
And what's your signature, like, style, or what's your signature? Do you concentrate on a certain industry? Are you still social?
Well, yeah, I mean, I use social to market my work, right? You know, so those networks have been fostered over the last 3 years and are quite strong, I think, and have been cleaned up at certain times. You know, the nutrients of your network are the basis of your marketing or your power. So yeah, well, yeah. So social, I'm interested in, but it's just more like the stuff that I'm writing about is that I'm interested in new territories and what's going on and what's. I mean, I'm a positive writer. You know, if something's really stupid and really bad, and I'm more than happy to write about that. But I'm interested in, you know, you know, and almost India for me has kind of passed me by. You know, it's, you know, I don't know. It's, you know, I lived there for a couple of years. That kind of depleted that interest. And then again, Sarah's work that she'd written about Rwanda and all those type of places, and started to open the African network. And I've been to, I mean, what it was before, I'll tell you, is that a month before we came back, I said to my wife, saying, right, I want to, looks like I'm going back to the UK, and, son was 7, and we're going to be back in the thing, going to be working and, mortgage and everything like that. So I wanted to go to South Africa to see the World Cup. It's very cheap to fly from India to the East Africa. So the idea, and I'd always wanted to go to Ethiopia. So there's a good mate of mine, big Chelsea fan, Russell Mark. So I said to Russ, how about we meet in Addis, spend 3 days there, have a laugh, and then we go down to Bloemfontein to see England play Germany. So that was the plan. Was filming the second movie in Mumbai for a week and then flew to Addis, but I got very sick. I've been in India for 2 years, and I got really, really sick. I remember arriving at the Rastafari Hotel Ras Hotel, and I couldn't get out of bed for 4 or 5 days. I was really ill, puking and shitting and everything.
Just before you continue with the story, I mean, Bryce, can you tell me what are the pieces that you like most about Monty? Is it his perspective of the emerging markets, or what do you find that he writes about this different?
When I first met Monty, I think through the scenes, I think it's we're getting onto it now, which is he transitioned very well from being a sort of I remember a time in London where social media not too long ago was the precursor to startups. I remember this very well, and then there was this big rise of social media, and everybody knew what to do with it. And the US has had this as well, but probably a bit before. But so Monty did that, and that was tech journalism, a lot of which was concerning social media just before the Roundabout bit took off. But what I like about Monty is, and we'll get onto this, is he transitioned incredibly well to being known as a tech journalist for emerging markets, mainly because he would go to places that you couldn't get someone in the UK to go to. I mean, and he would go and he would find people and he would interview them and he would talk about it. And I think you've now started doing stuff for The Economist, which I think is really interesting.
And the top 3 cities that come to mind for emerging markets for you is Nairobi one of them, and what else?
Lagos is probably the most interesting, but quite scary. Okay. I mean, on that trip, just to finish that, I ended up going to Somaliland, the country I didn't exist. So I sat with Russ and I had a good laugh, in Addis, and I said, I'm not going down to watch the football, I'm going to stay in Ethiopia. And then I did some mad bus journey for 2.5 weeks, and I wanted to get to Berbera in Somaliland to go to Yemen and go, long story, probably too long. But there was one moment in Somaliland where I had to hire a soldier for 2 days to take me from Hargeisa to these caves. And I had a soldier with me, and I was saying, shoot the gun, man. He's going, have you got any bullets in that? He goes, So we ended up in these caves that were 10,000 years old, and then his phone went off. Like a great piece of music, like from the Mississippi Delta. And I said, what's that? And then he said, well, do you want me to Bluetooth it to you? It's like, what? You even understand that technology? And we did it in the cave, 10,000 years old. And then you realise that Somaliland's an unrecognised country, and it's got 4 great operators. And I don't know, I just fell in love with the place. We were all born in Ethiopia, that's quite clear. That's where we came from, and that was probably the catalyst. Was that trip, and then understanding what was going on there and how mobile was transformed Africa. I mean, it's 80% of Africans now have a mobile phone.
Right.
I mean, that's insane.
So what is going on in Lagos and I keep saying Nairobi? Is that?
Well, Nairobi I think is easier because it's kind of like from the British. The plugs are the same. You can arrive in Nairobi from London on the overnight red eye quite easily, and that works out. There's a great hub there called iHub. There's a great man called Eric Hirschman and Juliana Rotich. Sorry. They had a start-up called Ushiandi, which was citizen journalism with the riots or the killings in Kenya 4 years ago. They've now changed that into this amazing BRIC, B-R-I-C, I think it's B-R-I-C, which is almost like a connector, a hub itself. So Nairobi, I would imagine, is reasonably ahead in that area. And Lagos frightens people because of its reputation. But what's going on in Lagos with e-commerce is unbelievable. There's 30,000 people arrive in Lagos every week, every month from across Africa. It's, it's almost a migration,
Is anyone investing in Lagos outside of Lagos?
No, absolutely. So basically there's no postal service in Nigeria. So there's a massive opportunity there for e-commerce. There's 2 companies, e-commerce companies called Konga and Jumia. I think both of them have received about $30 million in investment recently. I think there was a second round. I think it's Rocket Internet in Germany is one of the big players.
Do the Yanks get involved over there, or is
it
so far away from home?
That's a good question, and I'd imagine there's a scramble for Africa at the moment, like there was a scramble for Africa in imperial times at the end of the 19th century. You know, I would imagine that there's also a kind of slightly more benign channel which would be going through South Africa. But, you know, in Nigeria, they're offering, I mean, this is like between 18 and 22 million people with traffic chaos and madness after 6 a.m. And they're offering to deliver stuff within 24 hours. And if you can do that stuff...
Something as basic as the mail is basically a startup there, right?
And then 3 days within the rest of Nigeria. But what's interesting, connected with that, apart from this, you know, ongoing success, is drone delivery. You know, we're talking about Bezos and Amazon and all these kind of PR stunts about...
Did you see that video where they did the drone?
Amazon Air, I think, is it?
Is that what they're calling
it? Yeah,
it?
something like that.
I mean, it was a PR stunt, a very good one.
No, a good one. But I mean, it's more likely to... Lagos is the type of city where you expect to see drones in the air. You know, it's like Blade Runner, and it's bonkers, but it works, you know.
I was thinking about it. Like, can you imagine walking around London with, like, you know, 500 drones whizzing by you? I mean...
Probably not, but you could in Lagos.
Right, you could in Lagos, right. Okay.
And there's a great man called Jonathan Legard, was a war correspondent for The Economist. I saw him in Nairobi this week. So he's in Lausanne with some type of foundation. So they've set up this thing called the Flying Donkey Challenge. So basically, it's like any African startup. You have to deliver, I don't know exact details, but you have to deliver 10-kilogram payloads, and then the drone goes all the way around Mount Kenya and delivers 10 on the way back. It's like the magnificent men in their flying machines, you know, 100 years ago. Insane, you know. And I think that the Amazon of... the new Amazon, I suppose, will come from somewhere like Nigeria.
Where they do it as a necessity, and then you use that in a first world.
If you can make it work there, you can make it work anywhere.
Okay.
You know.
I think the Yanks, by definition, have a hard time understanding Africa because they're so far away from it. And like, you would never necessarily bump into someone from Nigeria in the United States, but you bump into people from Nigeria all the time here. And I think sometimes you maybe forget, as a former colony.
Well, it's difficult to fly direct to the US.
Yeah.
From you know, you can fly, I think, directly from, I don't know exactly, but you can fly directly, I think, from South Africa. But if you were flying from Nairobi, you'd probably have to go to Amsterdam to change, you know. So it's a really massive commitment to actually get there in the first place.
But you see Rocket getting involved down there, and some other...
They were one of the first, weren't they? Because they only look at scaling rapidly in emerging markets.
And Tony Davis, that spoke in one of your previous editions, I mean, you just refer to that. I mean, he knows more than anyone about it.
He's amazing, actually, what he's done there.
I would recommend people that are listening and watching this to go back to that, because he'll tell you he's an investor. And he's a bit of an old boy, you know, a veteran, but, you know, he's doing great stuff for Nigeria.
Great stories about there. I know there are some of the pharmaceutical, you know, you could like text in your pharmaceutical code to make sure it was a reliable piece.
Or you can scan the barcode and you get, you know, there's all, the thing about it, I think there's this kind of vague thing about Africa, you know, it's very good for people to do that. But really, you know, just let Africans get on with it. I mean, they're doing amazing jobs. I mean, they're natural born hackers anyway, you know, and the stuff that's going on, honestly, you should go. Just go for 3 or 4 days, you know, and just have a look around. And it's, you know, it's the future of the world.
And is it scary? Do you get scared when you go to Lagos?
I shit myself in Lagos.
Okay.
I really did.
And
excuse my language.
Yeah, can you tell us is it when you land in the airport, are you just worried? What are you worried about?
Well, I think you're worried about the reputation. And then kind of Lagos means lagoon, right? So I've seen that movie Escape from New York. Victoria Island is this kind of area of embassies and hotels, and there's a bridge called the Third Mainline Bridge, I think, and it's the biggest bridge in Africa. And then you're on the mainland, you know. And we were going to go out to a beach bar in Lagos with some sort of concession at the hotel, thinking it would be just like Goa. You know, we ended up in the middle of the slum and, drinking heavily, you know, warm beer, and then we went across the bridge onto mainland. And our driver was a bit of a player, so he was kind of taking his clothes off and nothing weird, you know, he was taking off his epaulets and his uniform. We ended up in an outside bar, and then I don't know, it all went off in there. I started playing this guy for money for pool, which was fine, you know. Then the people from the hotel were trying to say, don't play for him, and then honestly it went mental. We ended up, it was a big fight, tried to stop it, don't stop the fight, you idiot. And then we walked out, and then there were pimps, and there were people on dwarves, and then there were prostitutes in the car.
Okay, so it's dangerous.
You know, I mean, it might have just been my experience.
But if you stayed in your hotel, is it dangerous?
Oh, you're fine.
Oh, okay.
You know, it's just like being anywhere else in the world, you know.
Yeah.
But, you know, I know I've travelled a lot, but, you know, and I don't want to dismiss Nigeria because I haven't seen Lagos, I haven't seen that much of it. But I was worried, You know what I mean? It was quite dark.
And what are your thoughts on London as a scene? I mean, we always ask everyone that comes here, you know, what do you think London has as one of its assets, and what do you think we do better than any other city here? And then on the flip side, what do you think we need to improve?
Well, listen, man, when I was a dispatch rider, I knew London, right? You know, and that was the greatest beauty of that job. You know, I was living in Stoke Newington and lived east, west, south, north. It was always 15, 20 minutes away on a bike, you know what I mean? Lots of gigs, lots of clubs, you know, I love London, absolutely. And I've seen London go through peaks and troughs, you know. I was a punk in the day, you know, going up to the Lyceum and Music Machine and finding out London via a motorbike, really, you know what I mean. And it goes up and down, you know. When London's skint, that's when it's the best, you know what I mean. If you ring up someone to pay your bill and the other guy's on the end of the phone saying, money, yeah, mate, I know what you mean. Yeah. Then you start talking about which club you went to. Yeah, I've been there. Anyway, no worries, mate. I'll give you 6 months. You know, there's that kind of community where it's £3 to get into a club, not 25 quid. And I've seen that, you know, and I was quite dubious when I came back to London about Silicon Roundabout. You know, it's like app roundabout almost, and you know, so I was a bit. And then there was the Olympics, and it was like London was too jolly, and London was too successful, and there was no edge. No one was skint, you know.
Jolly London.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, it has been a huge bull market, I guess.
Yeah, but I think in the last year and a half, I've changed my mind. I think I'm a Soho boy, you know. But my focus is shifting over here, you know. Hobson Hotel, all these great people. It's almost like New York, you know. If you're in Soho and you go out for a cigarette or something like that, you know, and you ask someone for a light, so what do you want? Who are you talking to? And in here, you know, it's more like to be a really nice girl that chats to you, gives you a light, and it's just a bit social. I think what London needs is an exit. I think you've got Moshy Monsters, slightly kind of hackneyed, you know, Acton's doing a great job. There needs to be more of that, you know. And like, you know, if it wants to be like some Silicon Roundabout thing, you know, Silicon Valley's always kind of, it's gone round and round because people have exited and invested their money into different things. I think London needs an exit.
What's going to be that exit?
We've got Zoopla, we've got Just Eat, we've got AO was quite.
Yeah, and you've got, I suppose you've got kind of Candy Crush, you know, King.
Yeah, it's King.
But that's kind of Regent Street. That's not East, you know. I mean, we used to do business with them at Player X. They weren't even a games company in those days.
Are these, you know, like those three you mentioned? Are those going to transform it? Are those going to be the exits?
I think Zoopla.
Zoopla will be big, I think.
And Just Eat's coming up soon.
Just Eat's coming up. There's a bunch of. It's weird actually. I've just been looking into this today. There's a bunch of not big ones, but there's a bunch of health tech, clean science, like biotech, like healthcare and
round
pharmaceutical. No, not around here, but just London generally. I think there's a few. Well, Cambridge and Oxford. Yeah. There's a bit. It's interesting to see the trends. I think the London companies, Halo maybe, if they do. I don't know. They haven't announced yet, but my money's on Zoopla and King, if only. But King's going to be NASDAQ, isn't it? So.
But those aren't exits; those are IPOs, and so you don't get people.
Oh, you mean exit? Sorry, M&A. Sorry.
Do we need that? I mean, when you say that, it's
yeah,
not just
fair
the
point.
IPO.
Actually, fair point.
You kind of need the exit, so you
an
get.
IPO's not.
You need 20 people cashing out.
Yeah,
and spending
yeah.
money,
IPO is
right?
also amazing. And,
yeah,
and
that's
great.
a great step. Yeah.
Sorry, I've been reading about IPOs all day because it's been all over the news this week and last week.
Yeah, absolutely.
They're thinking it's all starting to get its own momentum. M&As, I think. Well, there was the Google one for here in London, the DeepMind, the artificial intelligence, 500 million, which is not and for a company, let's be honest, nobody had heard of. Like,
what was the games one? The games engine. That was a. God, I can't remember the name.
I mean, on that same note, what do you think is the asset of London? What do you think London does better than New
Well,
York?
I mean, I'd go back to the point of me knowing London reasonably well over the last 30 years from the punk days. I think it's the best city in the world at the moment. You know, like I've kind of believed that anyway, but it does go through times where it's, you know, it's quiet and all that. I think it's amazing, and I don't think it's just post-Olympic bloom or anything. I just feel, you know, just coming over here, it just feels right. Yeah, it just feels good. I mean, I don't go clubbing anymore. I might go and see the odd gig around here sometimes, but it just feels like if you want to be somewhere. I mean, Berlin, I think, is also very similar. You know. That's I think New York is almost becoming, you know, the ad capital of the world like it was in the 60s and 70s. But I think people come to London because they think it's cooler than most cities, and I think it attracts talent, and I think it attracts very cool people.
Yeah, no, it does. I mean, you said earlier you like London when it's skint, and right now it's obviously not. I mean, if you try,
yeah, but that's what I'm trying to say. I love London when it's skint,
right,
and it's really rich at the moment.
Super rich,
but it's also good.
Is that? Do you think it's still good, or is it going to hurt us?
I think it's
with
great.
Property values and everything going way up. There is so much cash flashing around this town, and it's not all tech related. It's not all property related.
It's finance related. It's all
well, real estate in this country, in London, is becoming reserve currency, right? I mean, it's quite clear
because it's non-euro denominated, and it's
and
for Russian, for Middle East, for Chinese, for anyone in Europe who wants to.
Yeah, and for all the demerits that receives, it does. Whatever bankers make, it does circulate as much as an exit circulates. So I don't think you should be too. There are obviously disparity of wealth and wealth distribution, obviously, but I don't know. It's probably the first time that London's been flush, and it's brilliant.
Right.
In my opinion.
Fair enough. And what are you looking at the next year or two? I mean, are there certain industries or certain companies that you find exciting and that you write about?
Well, I suppose it would be back to Africa. If I was a single guy, I would definitely be living there. Doing something or other. But the fact is, I've got my eye open when I see these companies, and I'm not like an aid guy or a philanthropic guy. But like being out supporting those companies on their way up is of great happiness to me. So I suppose that's my focus, really. I was in Palestine a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, what was that?
I want to talk about the Middle East, because that's the other region you've done quite a bit in.
Because we hear about Israel a lot, obviously, tons of startups there, tons of exits there as well. I don't know anything about the Palestinian industry.
Well, I mean, it's a very tricky subject, right? I was on kibbutzim when I was in my early 20s. I've been all over Israel, from the Golan Heights to Eilat, and worked and had my passport nicked and worked on bad places on the West Bank. I remember I worked on this place, this Mashable, which is a cooperative farm. It was something like 16 cents an hour, and there was a right-wing Jewish settler, Algerian guy, who was my farmer, and my politics, probably similar now as they were then, was for me to despise him. You know what I mean? He was stealing the land from the Palestinians. But the unfortunate thing about that relationship was I really liked him. You know what I mean? And I think that for me is the kind of crux of it all. That the politics and the stuff is just so confusing, and you don't know where you're at. But this trip, I must say, to Palestine, and you realise, spending time in Tel Aviv for the first time for 25 years, a couple of times at the end of last year, it's connected, exits. I think they've got more companies listed in Tel Aviv on NASDAQ than the rest of the world.
Yeah, something crazy.
Something crazy, and it is kind of self-perpetuating, and have been those exits. And it's a great, vibrant scene, and it's brilliant. And I think even the Israeli Defence Force has a great start-up kind of conduit, and all that, amazing, great.
Yeah.
But then when you cross over into Ramallah, through the wall, this horrible, horrible kind of gash between those two countries, and then you realise that 8 years ago, Gaza and the West Bank, I think it was, I can't remember the name of the company, but 8 years ago, I think it was a Kuwaiti operator, one of the major operators there, spent 350 million or something like that on 2G and 3G licenses, and Gaza still doesn't have 2G, and Palestine or the West Bank has only got 2G. If you import hardware into Palestine, it has to go through an Israeli regulator. I mean, basically, the Israelis own the spectrum, they own the oxygen. As the Palestinian IT kind of minister told me a couple of weeks ago, and it just seems blatantly unfair. You know what I mean?
So is there a tech scene there?
There is, but it's very, very difficult.
Okay.
Again, when you're under those type of conditions, you hack and you do stuff, and there's, and the companies that I met there, it was about 70-30%. 30% was, it's impossible to do business. If I fly, even if I fly for a mine in Jordan, I still have to go through the Alembi Bridge. I still can only go through there, I think, between 9 and 5 during the week. It's shut at weekends. So they end up, spending time in Amman, But the 70% that were there, and it seems like they're there for the long haul, the bottom line was we're employing Palestinian. That's why we're here. We want to, change the perception of this country. Mm. And I think if there's anything, if that start-up scheme, there's VCs involved, there's a couple of interesting companies there. It's very nascent. In comparison to Tel Aviv, obviously. But a lot of outsourcing comes from the Israeli arms of behemoths like Intel and Microsoft, and they outsource work to to Palestine.
Okay.
You know, this is the
coding work and things like that.
Yeah, because it's 50% cheaper than they're doing it with an Israeli company. These have got to be great things, you know. And if this thing, and I think it's like the Israeli tech community and the Palestinian tech community, they don't really give a fig about politics. They just want to hack and they want to code and they want to do stuff. And so in that respect, hopefully, that might be some form of optimism for the most complicated place on the planet.
Yeah, I'd like to see what happens there. You know, before we finish up, I wanted to ask you about Russia. Is that an emerging market or a market that you keep in mind? Obviously, we got crazy things going on with Ukraine right now, with sanctions going on, and is it something
but it's interesting that I was with this guy, Eric Hirschman, in Nairobi a few months ago, and he was talking about the Nairobi startup scene, and he said, we take our inspiration from Russia. And I went, really? Wow. And I've been over to a startup village in Moscow last year and met lots of companies, and it's extraordinarily Russian, the way they do stuff. There's a Skolkovo Foundation that's kind of battleground between Medvedev and Putin that goes from left to right. I know a few people involved there. So some great ideas. You know, some would say white elephant, some would say Silicon Kremlin, I think they call it. The Russians don't like that.
Okay.
But the reason that Eric said that about the African or the Kenyan market was because the Russians are very good at kind of getting their products successful domestically. You know what I mean? There's a form of great engineers and great talent, but not amazing experience of marketing and that type of thing. So they concentrate on getting the domestic market, you know. And I think that's interesting, you know, if you can do that in some sort of big country, you know, lots of, there's hubs in Yekaterinburg and Vladivostok and all that, you know, there's a lot of stuff going on. It remains to be seen how far that will come, bearing in mind current conditions.
Yeah, we spoke about Ivan Mazur earlier, who was our guest, and he outsources his tech, I think, to Moscow.
I think it's almost like an Anglo-Russian company,
Okay.
Metria.
Okay.
But they're very interesting. He'll be on the front cover of Wired in 2 years, without a doubt.
Yeah, that's a fantastic
He's
episode.
a very, very charming man, I have to say.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see what happens with these sanctions or if they block things. I don't know if there really be
What
a big
do you
change.
think?
I mean, I think the U.S. is posturing. I think they cannot control what Russia's doing, and Putin's making a smart, you know, geopolitical move on his side. But I know they're going to try to limit some banks and things like that, but I don't see it really affecting the tech side. And
Maybe. I mean, I don't know if there's sanctions for hardware, but I actually don't know.
or travel, you know. I haven't. Besides Ivan, I didn't know of anyone who was kind of outsourcing tech work to Russia. I know Estonia and some of the former republics, but
I think that's because of the strength of the domestic market. I mean, that's where the kind of energies and resources are applied. Maybe it is the model for the future.
Yeah.
You know, get big domestically and then export.
They've got their own Facebook, Willkommen, is that called? And then they're vk.com. And
Yandex are pretty
Yandex
amazing.
is their own Google, and they are very successful companies. And they're
But it'd be interesting to see the companies that kind of committed to be part of Skolkovo Village. I think it was Cisco and Samsung, and even Zuckerberg was over there last year. It'd be interesting to see how they react.
Yeah.
And that would be interesting.
No, definitely. Before we finish, Bryce, just wanted to get your thoughts for what you think's coming up for this year in London. Obviously, we got a few potential IPOs that are pretty exciting. Is there other stuff that's on your radar as far as things that
what's going on my radar?
that weren't there, say, a year ago, as far as like new companies or new angles or things that you were surprised to see?
I reckon I'm curious to see, just following on from the theme about Russia, but whether we're going to see, if this IPO swing continues, like if we, let's be honest, this has taken years of like hand wringing, and why do they, if it does continue and it's seen as successful, I'm curious to see if we start seeing some of the big European players moving in, which would be really interesting.
Moving into IPOs?
Moving into London for that reason.
Okay.
So whether we see people from Scandinavia, which is an amazing, Scandinavia is, for me, the region to watch.
What do you mean big companies moving in?
I mean big tech, big startups coming in that are, established, don't necessarily need to move to London because they have European operations, but are doing so. So I think, it'd be interesting to see with Berlin, but for me, I think Scandinavia is the area to watch this year. I think I keep seeing interesting. They've had some very, very good heroes in, Supercell.
Trondheim's really interesting in Norway. I mean, I think Norway's got the biggest surplus of most countries. Well, I don't know exactly. But Trondheim, up by the Arctic Circle, was an amazing hub of amazing companies doing stuff there. It might be one of those type of territories that kind of, surprises us all.
Well, Trustpilot from Copenhagen just took 25 million in, which is a massive round from a number of London-based international.
What do they do?
It's consumer rating site for businesses. So but it does both ways. So you're able to answer, the business can actually answer, and so there's kind of consumer, but big across Europe, just moving in now. We're setting up and getting going in London, hoping to take the US. But I mean, 25 million is a big round.
Yeah,
and the VCs were, I mean, you don't get a 25 million round in Europe without having some serious big VCs to foot that bill.
Right. And talking about Scandinavia, Just Eat started in Denmark before they moved to London.
They did. And in fact, the founder now runs an event called Tech Barbecue in Copenhagen that's apparently very, very good. A really interesting tech conference over in Copenhagen. We had some dealings with him earlier this week. Lovely guy. Really lovely guy.
Okay.
Yeah, but you're right. It's a very good pickup, yeah.
Yeah, interesting to see if that continues. Monty, how do people get in touch with you? How do they read your stuff? What do they find on you?
I don't know. So you can find anything, I suppose, of a search, but it's at Monty Munford, M-U-N, not that rubbish band, Mumford and Sons, which is the bane of my life.
Everyone misspells your name on the back of that?
It's my answer phone message. No, don't get it wrong. And then I've just got a blog, which I've been writing for a few years, called Mob, M-O-B 76, the numbers, Mob 76 Outlook, which is, you know, doing very well, gets 70 or 80,000 uniques a month, and just being accredited by Google News, so hopefully there'll be an accelerator there.
Oh, wow.
It probably will come back to the blog, everything that I do, I suppose.
How many articles do you write a month?
Once a week for the Telegraph, I don't know, probably about 10 or 12, I suppose, you know, just fill the channels when the, you know, at the right time in the right place, and some reasonably amazing editors, especially at The Economist, you know, tough school to get your stuff done there, but, you know, just trying to get better as a writer, nearly up to my 10,000 hours, maybe.
Okay, for mastery.
Yeah, just a little bit more, just another 6 months.
The Economist is a different kind of breed, isn't it? I mean,
it's amazing.
It's highly detailed.
If you try and get something published at The Economist and you get commissioned by them and the rocks that you have to walk over, you know, great rocks. Great editors, great people.
I mean, they are so smart.
Are there no bylines in The Economist?
No bylines.
No bylines, and you can't pitch them. I mean, it's they control what they
They're
cover.
the best, man. I mean, I didn't even...
Is that the gold standard when it comes to writing?
I didn't even know that, to be honest, because I always thought they were a bit right for me and, you know, left, they're not anarchists, let's just say that, you know. But the process in the last year, I've only ever had 2 pieces published by them in the last 3 or 4 months, and I've walked across hot coals to do it. Okay. But I've become a better writer because of that process.
Yeah, I'm sure. And they've changed their reach tremendously in the last few years, and even not their business model, I would say, but you know, you see their 2 bads, and you see, you know, it's so many people read that magazine now.
The only thing about it is that if you subscribe to it, you never get around to reading it all.
Yeah.
You know, because you could spend at least 6 hours going through it on every piece is interesting.
I have a hard time finishing a single article because they dive so deep, and I just it's just mind blowing the amount of detail.
It's a massive privilege for me to write from. You know.
Yeah, really they are good. I mean, you have to think to yourself, like, the quality of the writers and this is a weekly publication too, right? So they start. It goes out on Friday, and they are in a board meeting Friday afternoon deciding the next week's.
And they're almost busting the model. Their print is going up through the roof while everything else is going down. Yeah. And it's really nice to know that quality could still be successful, you know what I mean?
There's not many examples anymore, and it's probably interesting that, for me, I think is interesting about them is this fact that they are so good at making sure that it's not about the writers or the people, it's about the content, that you can't even access the writers. Most people, it's very difficult to find out who does what at The Economist. Just as, trust me, I've spent
They must
10
get
years.
pressure to change that. But
but like, I think that's what makes them so powerful, is you never know.
You could always say that you're a writer for The Economist and no one would ever know.
Yeah, I had one of my ex-girlfriends.
It's a good idea, Monty, I might use that.
Yeah, one of my exes, she was a writer, and she always used to tell me, I wrote for The Economist, and then when we broke up later, I was like, I could never confirm that. Yeah.
Well, they're quite interesting. I mean, you have to sign a real disclaimer. You know, I mean, it's serious. You know,
to say that you won't. Say
but you can republish the stuff that you've written for The Economist on your own blog.
Oh, okay.
They're quite cool about that. You know, it's not totally proprietary.
Okay.
Have you met Ludwig Siegel?
Ludwig, I actually weirdly had lunch with him today.
He's amazing.
Yeah, and he gave me...
He's the writer for The Economist.
So he's the technology editor now, isn't he?
I think he does the business, and he does. I mean, like most people at The Economist, he does. I had lunch with him today, and it was another lesson in, you know, what you should do if you're writing. Don't be so flowery. Get to the point. You know the story. You know, and I just sat there.
I'll try and get him on the show.
He's a great guy.
Nice to see that you're always learning and always trying to make your craft better. because I would think a lot of people aren't doing that. So Monty, thanks so much for coming. It's really nice to get out of our cycle of who you are, what's your business model, how you're going to scale in London, and then rinse and repeat. I love hearing about new businesses, but it's nice to take a bit of a switch and hear
talk about new regions.
Yeah, new regions too. And,
good conversation. Sorry if I banged on.
No, it was good stuff. It was good stuff. And yeah, regions that are important to London. You know, these regions, like you talk about in Africa, they don't really apply to Tokyo or to New York or to San Francisco. It's regions that, you know, we know a lot about being here. So fantastic. Follow Monty on Twitter. Bryce is at Bryce_Keane, Keane.
And Bryce with a Y.
Bryce with a Y. Check him out. If you're listening to us on iTunes, you can check our faces out on YouTube channel Silicon Reel. We're on Twitter at Silicon Reel. Send us a message, hello@siliconreel.com. Always looking for great guests, so please send us suggestions. And thanks guys. We say it's about the people.
It was about the people today.
It is. I know. Thanks, Bryce, for the intro. Monty, all the best. Stay in touch. Send us some pictures from your next outing in Lagos.
Okay. Don't play pool for money.
All right, guys. Take care.
Thank you.
Okay.
Cheers.
Bye.
Cheers.
We went out and met lots of businesses in the UK, all over the place, and we were kind of like, what do you need? We want to invest equity in the business. And they were like, no, what we really worry about is working capital. Businesses can come online, apply, and within 24 hours, figure out whether they can use us or not to access the funding. 2011, we did 3 million. 2012, we did 33 million. 2013, we did 66 million. And since the beginning of the year, we've done over 35 million pounds. We're not here just to make money, right? We're here also to change the world.